Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Eagles. You know what? I just did a video, it doesn't seem like that long ago, where they announced that they were adding a few, mind you, extra shows to their long goodbye tour that would creep ever so slightly into 2024. Of course, it wasn't too long before all of January and half of February were full of brand new shows. Well, the band has announced that they are adding 7 new shows with an addendum announcement stating that the band would be touring right up until 2025. It starts off with a farewell tour, doesn't it? That becomes a long goodbye tour. I have a feeling in 2025 we're going to see their Sayonara tour, followed immediately in 2026 with their We'll Be Back tour. All right, so I've done my fair share of criticizing bands that have become more a brand than a band. I admit that, all right? I've criticized Foreigner for having no members left, Yes for only having 1 member, and Kiss for planning to get 4 brand new members with nobody left in the band and calling it Kiss 2 or something like that. But you know what? As great as you may think those bands are, they really are in the B leagues. The major brands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, this is when the brand depends on surviving egos and how well healed those egos are. And the Eagles themselves belong in this echelon of rock bands. Now, with the Rolling Stones, with the exception of the very, very early years when Brian had a say, it was basically whatever Mick and Keith wanted to do, the band did. Now, I do want to mention the Beatles just briefly here, because that's the ultimate rock brand, if you think about it. And they had a firm rule in that band. And to me, I always thought this should be written into law, you know, all for one, one for all. If Ringo doesn't want to go to Africa to film their final concert, the Beatles don't go. If George doesn't want Now and Then to be put out while he was still alive, it got squashed. Because I gotta tell you, as far as I'm concerned, if you don't have that kind of understanding, you wind up with a band like the Eagles. Now, before I go any further, I want it understood. You're looking at a major Eagles fan. I bought all of their albums. I was a fan of both Glenn Frey and Don Henley. And even before that, I was a Joe Walsh fan already. Now, I won't be getting too much into the history of the Eagles. I've done that before. I'll pin that video up here, folks. Now, when the Eagles first started, they were a 4-member country rock band, or at least that's how they were identified, but that never sit well with either Frey or Henley. They did not like being labeled as such, and so they thought, let's bring on a 5th member that could add more punch to the band. And of course, that's when they added Don Felder. Don Felder, when he joined, he became a full-timed Eagle, in full standing, folks. He was as much a part of the Eagles as either Don Henley or Glenn Frey. Of course, when Meisner quit, they brought on Timothy B. Schmidt and, of course, added Joe Walsh there in the mix as well. And at the time, all of us thought these were the Eagles. In other words, there was the original Eagles, there were the latter Eagles, and Don Felder fit in both camps a bit, didn't he? Now, there was no doubt during this time that the band's dynamics were, well, the more powerful members were Don Henley and Glenn Frey. And then Joe Walsh, since he had already been famous a couple of times before even joining the Eagles, seemed to have almost near equal status with them, even though we all knew he wasn't being given a lot of songs per album. And of course, to the casual fans, it seemed like the Eagles had two George Harrisons, two quiet ones, right? There would be Timothy B. Schmit and Don Felder. And there's no doubt these were the buddy years. Everybody was getting along right up until when the band collapsed as they released their final album at that time, The Long Run. Everybody was overindulging in everything, and the band as a band was falling apart, and the members themselves personally were falling apart as well. Over a decade later, the band did what they thought at the time could be just a one-off, the Hell Freezes Over video and album, even having 4 brand new songs. Now that was such a success that of course they immediately toured that set, and that's when things started to fall apart again. Joe Walsh had always received nothing more than a salary, and that's true for Timothy B. Schmit. They were never offered full membership into the band. I gotta tell you, that was news to me, because the entire time they were in that band, I thought they were all full-time members. Now, they started looking at this pot of gold, right? That at the time would have to be split 3 ways. And they reasoned amongst themselves, thinking, we might benefit a little bit better if this was a 2-way split. And that was the start of them not so slowly trying to force Don Felder out. First with a contract he wouldn't sign, then them not speaking to him, and even ordering other members of the band to not speak to him. Now that's interesting, because Don Felder and Joe Walsh were best buddies while they were in the Eagles. Don Felder helped more than any of the other Eagles, no matter what Joe Walsh says today, get Joe Walsh sober, even driving him to rehab, visiting with him all the time. If Don Felder hadn't been in the Eagles, we may have had another rock and roll tragedy. Now, what does all of this have to do with this current tour? You see, this gets back to the idea of branding. What Don Henley has done here has made a brand that's guaranteed to die the day that he dies. It's not like Joe Walsh could go on tour as the Eagles. He was never the Eagles, and he doesn't have a right to the name. He could add Timothy B. Schmit. He doesn't have a right to the name. And when that happens, he feels that will secure his spot in history. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. That helps with channel growth, believe it or not. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel as of yet, that's easy. Just hit that subscribe to the tribe button, tap that top bell icon, and you'll be notified of all of my future videos. All right, I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line. And folks, you and I, in the comments especially, we are the tribe.